Reading to you from my autobiography entitled, I Count My Life by Sabbaths. Part 1, My Heritage. Chapter 3, The Persian Side. My mother was a Persian princess, something that many folks described her as. One of 4 children of Andrew Bar David Urshan and his Swedish wife Mildred. They had Grace Suzanne, Nathaniel Andrew, Faith Edith, my mother, and Andrew David Jr., named after my grandfather. The term Bar means son of, so my grandfather Andrew's father was David, thus Andrew Bar David, son of David Urshan. David's wife was Nassimo, and together they had 5 sons, all born in the village of Abajalu, province of Azerbaijan, Persia. David Urshan, known for strict piety, was the pastor of a large Presbyterian congregation in Abajalu that drew congregants from the surrounding villages. His sons were Andrew, my grandfather, Timotheus, Josephus, who died from a tragic accident as a child, and Joseph, so named because of the death of his older brother, and the youngest, Benjamin. All 4 surviving sons eventually made it to the United States, surviving a Kurdish massacre that ended up taking the lives of David and Nassimo. The harrowing story of survival is told in my grandfather's autobiography entitled The Story of Andrew Bar David Urshan, and in my great-uncle's book, Benjamin, his autobiography is entitled Survivor. My great-grandfather David sent my grandfather to the United States to be educated when he was barely a teenager. The cart ride and the walking through the nation of Georgia, which is in Europe, to get to Russia and then eventually to Hamburg is a harrowing tale, as well as a record of an amazing achievement by this boy. It's a testimony to the faith of my great-grandfather that Andrew would make it to the United States safely. From Hamburg, Andrew gained passage by ship to Ellis Island, where he was detained for a period of time before he was released to try to find some cousins who had come before in the great city of New York. How he found them in such a vast metropolitan city is truly amazing. Working in a factory, then as a dishwasher, and eventually as a waiter, Andrew gathered some fellow immigrants into a prayer and Bible study group in New York. He became somewhat of a celebrity among the Assembly of God churches in the region, telling his story of migrating to the United States. Many of these churches were supporting mission works in Persia. His reputation began to garner him invitations in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Idaho, California, and Illinois. In his travels through Wisconsin, he met and married the tall, willowy Mildred Hammergren, daughter of David and Josephine. David Hammergren served as the state assemblies for Minnesota and Wisconsin, as well as publishing the city paper in Cochrane. Andrew was several years the senior of Mildred, and she was a gifted singer and musician who complemented his growing ministry. Andrew and Mildred moved to Chicago, where my grandfather gathered another large following of Persian immigrants near the Moody Bible Institute. My mother was born to them in Chicago, June the 25th, 1924, and during the summers they would visit Mildred's family in Cochrane. Partly due to my grandfather's extensive travels about the States, my grandmother, in his absence, fell to the wooing of Harry Hester, a preacher wannabe. She divorced Andrew, leaving him with the care of all the children, and moved to San Antonio, Texas. There she died a very sad, lonely death, abused by her second husband. I never got to meet her, but I did receive a letter from her inviting me to come see her. I never acted on it, even when I was attending a seminary in Houston, Texas. The scandal surrounding this sad chapter created a forbidding air of mystery in our family. My mother told me that Mildred came to visit her right after I was born and that she held me, but that's not in my memory. Grace Suzanne became a model for a magazine and eventually married Arvid Larson. Both Nathaniel, my uncle, and my mother Faith contracted tuberculosis and were confined to sanitariums until they recovered. Andrew Jr., my uncle and my grandpa's youngest, was born with muscular dystrophy, a familial disease carried by females. He died before the age of 22. I was told that he loved having me crawling around on his bed when I was an infant. My mother was a carrier of this disease, as well as my sisters still are. Therefore, my brother William Paul died before the age of 21, and my nephew Danny Brown, my sister Ethel's second son, died before the age of 23. 3 generations of second sons died from this dreadful disease. My mother became involved as a music director at Apostolic Bible Institute, adjunct to Midway Tabernacle in St. Paul, Minnesota. Stuart Grant Norse, pastor of Midway Tabernacle at the time, was also president of ABI. My grandfather had been involved in the founding of that church and for a short time served as one of its first pastors. It was at Apostolic Bible Institute that my parents became engaged. Having attended Juilliard, my mother, like her mother before her, was very gifted as a musician, songwriter, arranger, and director. She passed these skills on to my sisters, but I was the one woefully lacking in the music department. Please tune in to the next episode of My Life. I count my life by